The spreadsheet was our Bible. For 15 years, every vacation we didn't take, every fancy dinner we skipped, every cheap bottle of wine we chose over the good stuff was a line item in that document, a tiny sacrifice offered at the altar of our future. Our joint savings account was more than just money. It was a testament to our partnership, a carefully constructed fortress built brick by brick with our shared discipline. He was the architect of our financial plan, the one who would track the interest rates and rebalance our portfolio. I was the enforcer, the one who would patch worn-out jeans instead of buying new ones, the one who mastered the art of turning leftovers into a new meal. We were a team, a perfect, synergistic unit working towards a single goal: early retirement, a small house by the sea, and a life free from financial worry. The day the fortress crumbled, it did so without a sound. He came to me after dinner, his face a carefully constructed mask of devastation. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had planned our budgets and celebrated our small financial victories, and he told me we were ruined. He spoke of a catastrophic, unforeseen market crash, of a high-risk investment he had made without telling me that had gone disastrously wrong. He used a lot of jargon, short squeezes, leveraged ETFs, margin calls, words designed to confuse and intimidate to make the disaster seem like an act of God rather than a failure of man. He showed me a printed statement from our joint account. The balance, once a healthy six-figure number that I could recite in my sleep, was now less than $1,000. The fortress was gone. It had been looted, and he was presenting himself as a fellow victim, a fallen soldier mourning our shared loss. The shock was so profound it felt like a physical blow, a sudden, soundless explosion in the center of my life. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just sat there, my hands flat on the table, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my palms, the only solid thing in a world that had just turned to liquid. My first instinct was to comfort him. His pain seemed so genuine, his self-flagellation so sincere. "I'm so sorry," he kept repeating, his head in his hands. "I thought I could make us rich, I got greedy, I lost everything." In that moment, he wasn't my husband, he was my child, a boy who had made a terrible mistake and needed his mother's reassurance. So I gave it to him, I held him, I told him it was only money, that we still had each other, that we would rebuild. We had done it once, we could do it again. I believed him. I believed in the narrative of a tragic mistake, a gamble that hadn't paid off. The days that followed were a blur of grief. I felt the loss of that money like a death in the family. It was the ghost at our dinner table, the empty space in our bed. He became withdrawn, depressed, he said. He started working late, taking on extra projects to try and make things right. I mourned the future we had lost, and I admired his supposed determination to claw our way back from the brink. I started cutting coupons with a new, desperate fervor. I considered getting a second job. I was fully enlisted in the army of our recovery, a loyal soldier ready to fight for our shared survival. The truth arrived not with a bang but with the quiet whir of a printer. It was 3 a.m. and I couldn't sleep. I was downstairs getting a glass of water when I heard the printer in his home office start up. He was asleep, or so I thought. I walked into the office assuming it was a junk fax or a scheduled report. A single sheet of paper sat in the tray. It wasn't a bank statement, it was an invoice for a domain name registration, and the name of the domain was Innovatech Solutions. Beneath it was a logo, a sleek corporate design I had never seen before. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy drum of dread. I gently nudged the mouse on his computer. The screen flickered to life. He hadn't locked it. Open on the desktop was not a trading platform showing a devastating loss, but a business plan. A meticulously detailed 50-page business plan for a tech startup called Innovatech Solutions. I scrolled through it, my blood turning to ice water in my veins. The section on seed funding was the final, brutal revelation. It detailed a single lump sum investment of $250,000 from a private founders fund, our exact savings. The date of the transfer was the day before he had told me we were ruined. He hadn't lost the money in a market crash, he had stolen it. He had taken our shared past, our shared sacrifices, our shared future, and he had funneled it all into his own secret dream, a dream that had no place for me. The betrayal was so audacious, so complete that I couldn't breathe. The man sleeping peacefully upstairs was not my partner. He was a thief who had robbed me in my own home. I wanted to storm into our bedroom, to throw the business plan in his face, to scream until my throat was raw. But as I stood there in the cold blue light of the monitor, a different thought began to form, a thought that rose from the ashes of my heartbreak. It was cold and clear and utterly ruthless. A confrontation would lead to a divorce. He would argue that the savings were a marital asset and that he was entitled to use his half to start a business. His lawyers would fight my lawyers. It would be messy, expensive, and in the end, he might just get away with it. He thought I was a simple, trusting fool. He had counted on my naivety, on my willingness to believe his story and play the part of the supportive, downtrodden wife. And that was the role I would play. I would be the most convincing, most dedicated, most heartbroken wife he had ever seen. I would play along with his pathetic charade of financial ruin, and while I was playing the victim, I would be plotting my revenge. He had started a company with my money. I decided I would find a way to own it. I went back to bed, sliding in beside his warm, sleeping body, the body of a stranger. I lay there in the dark, my eyes wide open, and I didn't cry. I planned. I had my own secret, a small inheritance from my grandmother that I had kept in a separate account under my own name. It was my in case of emergency fund. He didn't know about it. He had always handled the big picture finances, after all. He never would have thought to ask if I had a few $1,000s tucked away for myself. This was the emergency my grandmother had unknowingly prepared me for. The next morning I made him breakfast. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man who had gutted our life, and I smiled a sad, supportive smile. "We'll get through this," I said, my voice full of a sincerity that made my own skin crawl. "I believe in you," and I did believe in him. I believed he was a brilliant, ambitious man. And I was going to let his brilliance and his ambition make me very, very rich. The long game had begun. Living the lie was like performing a one-woman show to an audience of one, a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week production. My stage was our home, now a theater of false austerity. My costume was a wardrobe of carefully mended clothes and worn-out shoes. My script was a litany of financial worries and feigned encouragement. Every morning I would pack him a lunch of leftovers and a cheap granola bar, a supportive gesture to the husband who was working so hard to get us back on our feet. He'd kiss me goodbye, a peck on the cheek that felt like a cold stone, and head off to his extra projects, which I knew was the small rented office space where Innovatech Solutions was being born. He'd come home late, smelling of takeout and the nervous energy of a startup, and perform his part, collapsing on the couch with a theatrical sigh of exhaustion. I would rub his shoulders and listen to his carefully edited stories of his day, stories of demeaning freelance work and demanding clients, all while I knew he was actually meeting with engineers and pitching to angel investors. The condescension was the hardest part to swallow. He treated me with a sort of tender pity, as if I were a delicate, simple-minded creature who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of the business world he now secretly inhabited. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it," he'd say when I'd ask a pointed question about our finances. "I've got it under control." He had no idea my nights were spent not in worried sleeplessness, but in a furious storm of research. I became an expert on venture capital, on seed funding rounds, on corporate structures. While he was building his company, I was building my own secret enterprise. The inheritance from my grandmother wasn't enough to make a significant move, but it was a start. I used it to hire a discreet corporate lawyer and a savvy financial advisor. Together, we created a ghost. We formed a shell corporation in a different state, an entity with a bland, forgettable name like Northwood Holdings. It had no public face, no history. It was a blank slate, a perfect vessel for my secret ambition. The first opportunity came during his seed funding round. I knew from the documents on his computer that he was looking for outside investors to match his own founders fund. He would complain to me about how hard it was, how no one wanted to take a risk on a new idea. I would offer him empty platitudes. "I'm sure something will come through, honey. They just don't see the genius that I see." All the while, my ghost was preparing to make its move. Through my lawyer, Northwood Holdings made an offer. We came in as an anonymous investor, offering a significant cash infusion in exchange for a substantial equity stake. My husband was ecstatic. He burst through the door one night, waving a term sheet in the air, his face flushed with a victory he thought was all his. "You're not going to believe this," he shouted, swinging me around the kitchen. "An investment firm out of the blue, they see the potential, they believe in me." I feigned a tearful, joyous relief, hugging him tightly to hide the cold, triumphant smile on my face. "Oh, darling, I knew you could do it," I whispered into his shoulder. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was celebrating being saved by the very woman he had robbed. As Innovatech grew, so did my stake in it. With each subsequent funding round, Northwood Holdings was there, quietly increasing its position. I had to become resourceful to fund my side of the operation. I sold off my grandmother's jewelry, claiming it was to help with the bills. I took on remote freelance writing projects, telling him it was a little something to contribute to our recovery. Every penny I earned was funneled through my lawyer to Northwood Holdings and then injected directly into the heart of his company. He was so consumed by his own burgeoning success that he never questioned my sudden cottage industry. He just saw it as more proof of my endearing, if slightly pathetic, devotion. The company was a rocket ship. The product he developed was brilliant, I had to give him that. It was an innovative piece of software that solved a major problem for the logistics industry. He was lauded in the tech press as a visionary, a maverick. He started wearing expensive suits, driving a luxury car. Our home life changed, but the narrative remained the same. He was the magnanimous provider, slowly and single-handedly pulling us out of the financial hole he had accidentally dug. "See, baby," he said one evening, dangling the keys to a new car in front of my face. "Told you I'd fix it. Things are finally turning around for us." He believed he was a hero rescuing the damsel in distress, completely oblivious to the fact that the damsel owned the castle, the dragon, and the very ground he was standing on. The closer the company got to its IPO, the more arrogant he became. He had fully bought into his own myth. He was the self-made genius, the visionary who had built an empire from scratch. My role in his life had been reduced to that of a decorative, supportive accessory. I was the little lady he would thank in speeches, the one who had stood by him through thick and thin. He had no idea how thick the plot had become and how thin his own position truly was. The strain of the performance was immense. There were nights I would lock myself in the bathroom and shake with a silent, suppressed rage. To sit at a dinner party and listen to him accept praise for his courage and resilience took a level of self-control I never knew I possessed, but I never wavered. I was playing for the ultimate prize, not just the return of my money, but the complete and total annihilation of his manufactured reality. He thought he was on the verge of becoming a king. He didn't know he was just a CEO, and the chairman of the board was the woman he thought was at home clipping coupons. The final act was approaching, and I was ready. I had watched him build my empire. Now it was time for me to take my seat at the head of the table. The morning of the IPO was electric. Our house was filled with the scent of expensive coffee and my husband's even more expensive cologne. He stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the knot of his silk tie, a king preparing for his coronation. He was giddy, magnanimous, a conquering hero returning from a long and arduous war. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with a triumphant pity. "Well, we did it, baby," he said, pulling me into a hug. "I told you I'd get it all back and more. No more worrying about bills, no more second-hand clothes. From now on, you get whatever you want." He saw himself as a benevolent god, bestowing upon me a future of unimaginable luxury, a gift from his own brilliant hands. He had no idea I was about to foreclose on his entire universe. I smiled, a perfect, placid smile I had spent years perfecting. "I'm so proud of you," I said, my voice a flawless imitation of a devoted wife. "You deserve all of this." The bell-ringing ceremony at the stock exchange was a media circus. He stood on the podium, surrounded by his executive team and the investment bankers who had orchestrated the deal, and he beamed for the cameras. He was the star, the visionary, the man of the hour. I stood off to the side, just out of the main spotlight, playing my role as the supportive, slightly overwhelmed spouse. I watched the stock ticker as Innovatech Solutions, ticker symbol INVT, began to trade. The price soared. On paper, we were now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He thought it was his victory. I knew it was my payday. The first board meeting of the newly public company was scheduled for the following week. It was to be a formality, a celebratory gathering to toast their success and outline the future. My husband, as founder and CEO, was the undisputed king of this new public kingdom. He walked into that boardroom on the top floor of their gleaming new headquarters like he owned the world. He shook hands, he laughed, he accepted the slaps on the back from the other board members, the venture capitalists, the men he saw as his peers. I had declined his invitation to attend, telling him it was his world and I would just be out of my element. He had readily agreed. The meeting was called to order. The chairman, a man I had personally vetted and approved through my lawyer, cleared his throat. "First, on behalf of the board, I'd like to congratulate our CEO on a spectacularly successful public offering," he began, and the room broke into applause. My husband took a small, theatrical bow. "Now," the chairman continued, "before we move on to the agenda, there is one final piece of business. As is customary, I would like to formally introduce the board to the representative of our majority shareholder." A murmur of polite curiosity went through the room. There had been whispers for years about the mysterious, silent investment firm that had been with the company from the beginning, the one that had consistently increased its stake and now held a controlling interest of 51%. "Northwood Holdings. They've been an incredible partner to us," my husband said, smiling graciously. "Though they've always preferred to remain behind the scenes, we are of course thrilled to finally welcome them to the table." "Indeed," the chairman said, his eyes on the boardroom door. "Please welcome the principal of Northwood Holdings." The door opened and I walked in. I was not the woman they had seen in the background at the stock exchange. I was not the woman in the faded jeans and mendied sweaters. I wore a custom-tailored suit that had cost more than the car he had so proudly gifted me. My hair and makeup were flawless. I was not the supportive wife. I was the majority shareholder. The silence in the room was absolute. The polite smiles on the faces of the board members froze and then melted into confusion. But I only had eyes for my husband. I watched as his brain struggled to process the scene, to reconcile the woman he had left at home with the woman who had just walked into his boardroom. I saw the flicker of disbelief, the dawning confusion, and then the slow, sickening wave of comprehension that washed over his face, draining it of all color. He looked like he had been stabbed. I walked to the empty seat at the head of the table, directly opposite him, and sat down. I placed my leather briefcase on the table and opened it. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice calm and clear, resonating with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from me before. "And darling," I added, my eyes locking with his, "I believe you know who I am." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply laid out the truth with the cold, irrefutable precision of a surgeon. I presented them with the bank statements from our joint savings account, and then I presented them with the corresponding wire transfer to the initial Innovatech Solutions corporate account. I showed them the paper trail, the undeniable proof that the entire foundation of his company was built upon stolen marital assets. "As you can see," I said to the stunned board, "the seed money for this company was not a founder's fund. It was a theft. A fraud committed against me by the man you all know as your visionary CEO." I then turned my full attention back to my husband. The arrogant king was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling man, his empire crumbling around him in real time. "You told me we were broke," I said, my voice soft but carrying across the silent room. "And I played along. I clipped the coupons. I mended the clothes. I packed your lunch every single day. And every single night you came home and lied to my face while I was secretly funding your dream with the money you stole from me. You thought I was your partner in survival. I was your silent partner in business." I looked around at the rest of the board. "I believe this constitutes gross financial misconduct and a catastrophic breach of fiduciary duty from the very inception of this company. Therefore, as the majority shareholder, my first act is to call for a vote. Vote of no confidence in our current CEO." The outcome was a foregone conclusion. As the 51% owner, my vote was the only one that mattered. He was fired on the spot, humiliated in front of the very people whose admiration he had so desperately craved. Security was called. He was asked to clear out his desk. He was escorted from the building, a dethroned king cast out of his own castle, leaving behind a briefcase and a shattered legacy. I filed for divorce the next day. He was left with nothing. The hundreds of millions from the IPO were tied to the shares held by Northwood Holdings, my company. He had no job, no prospects, and a well-documented history of fraud that would make it impossible for him to ever raise money in the tech world again. I, on the other hand, had everything. I took my seat as the new chairwoman of the board of Innovatech Solutions. I moved into his corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city. He had secretly drained our savings to fund his startup. He had told me we were broke. He had played me for a fool, but he had made one fatal miscalculation. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. He never realized that the person who owned the room was sleeping right next to him. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.